Let me tell you something right now, and I want you to sit with this deep in your bones. There comes a moment in history, not just for nations but for people, where you stop waiting for permission, you stop asking, can I? And you start declaring, watch me. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly what India just did. Oh yes, they didn't send an email. They didn't knock politely on the world's door. They kicked it wide open and said, we ain't playing small no more. And let me tell you, that move right there, that shook America, shook it clean to the core, because the rules just changed, and India wasn't asking if you were ready. You see, for the longest time, the world has had a habit of underestimating India. They see the colors, the culture, the chaos, the noise, and they forget the genius, the grit, and the ground game. They look at Bollywood and yoga, but they don't see the billion brains behind that firewall. But now, oh now, they're starting to see it. Now America is leaning forward in the boardroom, putting down their coffee and saying, wait, what did India just do? Because India didn't come to play. India came to lead. This move wasn't random. It wasn't reckless. This was strategic, precision, calculated to the decimal. While some folks were busy tweeting and posting, India was building. While the headlines were focused on chaos, India was laying fiber optic cables and launching satellites into orbit. Quietly, consistently, boldly, and then, boom, they dropped the move. The kind of move that changes the board overnight. The kind of play that says, we're not your manufacturing backup plan anymore. We're not your outsourcing buddy. We're not your second choice. We are the table. See, people always get shocked when quiet people start roaring. When the humble ones raise their voice. But let me remind you of something. India has been patient, and patience, that's a powerful weapon. When you move from patience, you move with power. You don't stumble. You strike. Now let me talk about that mindset for a second. Because this right here, this ain't just about politics or military strategy or business deals. This is about belief. You can't make a move that big unless you believe you belong in that seat. And India just sat down in the global VIP section and didn't blink. That move, it wasn't luck. It was legacy, a nation built on resilience, a civilization older than almost any you can name, a people who have survived colonization, division, poverty, and propaganda, and still came out swinging. You can't break a country like that. You might slow it down, you might delay the rise, but you can't stop it. And now with this move, India is saying, we're not catching up, we're setting the pace. Let's talk tech. Oh yeah, I see you smirking out there, thinking this is just about one deal or one event. No, baby. This is about the accumulation of years of building. India's not just developing technology. India is defining it, from AI to quantum computing, from digital ID systems to space missions. This isn't about participation. This is about domination. You remember that time when America sneezed and the whole world caught a cold? Well now, India's moving and America's checking the forecast. They're watching the talent pipeline. The engineers, the coders, the CEO who once started in Mumbai slums and now run trillion-dollar firms in Silicon Valley. That ain't coincidence, that's consistency, that's culture. And don't even get me started on the defense game. See, when you got the whole world watching you, you don't just flex muscles. You build armor, you prepare, and India's been preparing in silence, building a military doctrine based on precision, not provocation. And when they move, it's measured, it's intentional, but when they strike, it's undeniable. That's what shook America. It wasn't just that India moved, it was how they moved. Calculated, coordinated, calm. You know how rare that is in today's world. When the rest of the world is busy yelling louder, India just whispered, and the world leaned in to hear what came next. Now let me pause right here and talk to somebody who might be listening and thinking, but what's this got to do with me? Everything. Because the lesson here ain't just for countries, it's for people. India's story is your story. How many times have you been overlooked? How many times have people underestimated you, put you in a box, gave you a label, called you not enough? Just like they did with India, but look what happens when you stop seeking approval and start making moves. That's what India did. They flipped the narrative, and now the same folks who used to ignore them are calling them. The same doors that were once shut tight, India ain't knocking no more. They're building their own entrance. And here's the twist: India didn't change its roots. They didn't abandon their culture to make a move. They doubled down, they embraced who they were, and that authenticity, that's what made the move stick. See, when you play big as yourself, the world has to respect it. You ain't copying, you're creating. And that's what India just did. They created a moment, and baby, let me tell you, it's one thing to be part of history. It's another thing entirely to make it. America's watching. The whole world's watching. They're trying to figure out what happened. How did India pull this off? How did they go from rising to arrived? Simple. They never stopped. They stayed hungry, kept building, kept pushing. While the spotlight was on someone else, they were grinding. While the West was arguing about politics, India was coding, testing, launching, negotiating. Now let me drop some truth for you. If you're building something right now, in silence, don't you dare quit just because nobody's watching. Nobody was watching India when they were grinding in the background, but they kept going, and now everybody's watching. And here's what makes this even more powerful. India's move, it wasn't just for themselves. It wasn't selfish, it was symbolic. It said to every underestimated nation out there, you ain't got to be the West to win. You ain't got to follow to lead. Play your game and play it big. India just reminded the world that leadership ain't about volume. It's about vision. And don't you know vision scares people? Oh yeah. See, the reason America shook is because India didn't just make a move. They revealed a vision, a future where the global order is shared, where influence isn't dictated by the past, but earned by the present, where power isn't monopolized, but multiplied. That's terrifying to the old guard, but to the rest of us, that's inspiring. Because what India just did, it shifted the energy. It changed the frequency. It told every nation, every entrepreneur, every underdog, you ain't gotta beg to be at the table. Build your OWN table, bring your own chair, and serve a meal so good they can't ignore it. Let me say this, India just served notice. The game has changed, and now we watching countries realign, investors reevaluate, alliances reconsider. Because when a country like India stands up, others have to sit up. You don't just continue business as usual, you reassess, you re-strategize, and here's the kicker. They still got more in the tank. This wasn't a one-time event. This was a signal. India just turned the ignition on a whole new engine. And if you think this shook America, wait till you see what comes next. But the deeper message, the message underneath all this noise, don't ever let someone else define your ceiling. India's move, that wasn't a surprise to those who were paying attention. It was just the arrival of a nation that's been knocking on destiny's door for a long, long time. And finally, that door opened because they didn't wait for validation. They moved with conviction. Now here's what I want you to do with this stake, this energy. Take this fire, whether you're running a business, chasing a dream, rebuilding your life. Take this moment as proof. Proof that when you stay true to yourself, when you stay hungry, when you move with purpose, eventually, the world will have no choice but to take notice. India didn't just make a geopolitical move. They made a motivational move. They said, we belong, we believe, and we're here to lead. So don't you sit there second. guessing your value. Don't you waste another minute waiting for someone else to crown you. Move like India. Move like you know who you are. Move like the future depends on you, because baby, it just might. And the next time someone asks who made that move, you look 'em in the eye and you say with pride India did. And it shocked the world. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. India's leadership model is redefining what a superpower looks like. For the longest time, the idea of global power was shaped by one image: massive economies, nuclear arsenals, aggressive foreign policy, and flashy dominance. It was a one-size-fits-all formula dictated by the West, but India never fit into that formula, not because it couldn't, but because it chose to design its own blueprint for power, and now that blueprint is being unveiled, and the world is stunned. Not by noise, not by force, but by a quiet, disciplined, relentless strategy that is rewriting the very definition of a global superpower. This shift didn't happen overnight. It wasn't the result of one event or one decade. It was a long, patient buildup of identity, confidence, and capability. And at the core of this transformation lies a military doctrine that is no longer defensive in posture alone. It is assertive, self-assured, and deeply rooted in indigenous innovation. India is not merely reacting to threats anymore. India is anticipating, preparing, and positioning itself with clarity and intent. This is not the posture of a regional power. It is the stance of a nation that sees the globe as its theater. India's doctrine today doesn't scream war. It signals deterrence. And the genius of it is that deterrence, when built on credibility, becomes more powerful than conflict itself. Through years of strategic restraint and selective engagement, India has shown the world that it can exercise power without recklessness. But that does not mean weakness. That means wisdom. Because while others were flexing unnecessarily, India was building systems, satellites, and supersonics. This is the India that is now deploying homegrown defense platforms like the Akashin, BrahMos, and Tejas, not just producing them for national defense, but exporting them, offering them to allies, putting them on the global map. And that shift from importer to exporter is one of the most defining markers of superpower maturity. It says, we don't just use the tools of power, we design them, we perfect them, and we share them. Innovation has become India's greatest weapon, not just on the battlefield, but in diplomacy, trade, and influence. Because when a country develops technologies that others depend on, it no longer needs to shout. Its presence is felt in the systems others use, in the infrastructure they adopt, and in the digital backbones they trust. India's innovation is now becoming the lifeblood of smaller nations looking for independence from traditional Western or Chinese control. That's a power move not with tanks, but with tools. And what makes India's innovation different is that it's grounded in pragmatism. It isn't chasing tech for vanity. It's building what it needs, customizing it for its terrain, and scaling it for its future. Whether it's battlefield drones, anti-satellite capabilities, smart border management systems, or cyber defense infrastructure, India's military doctrine has become as much about soft, whereas it is about soldiers. This isn't just modernization, this is transformation, but beyond the technology lies something even more powerful, the philosophical shift in how India views itself. A superpower is not just defined by how much it can destroy. It's defined by how much it can build, and India is building not just roads, ports, and military bases. It's building a new narrative, a story where power is exercised with responsibility, where sovereignty is sacred, and where leadership is earned, not inherited. India is showing the world that you can rise without abandoning your roots, that you can be proud without being arrogant, that you can be strong without being oppressive. It's rejecting the old notion that power must come with dominance and replacing it with a model of influence through respect. That alone makes India's leadership model revolutionary. For decades, leadership on the world stage was about controlling alliances, resources, votes, and voices. But India is turning that concept on its head. Today, nations are choosing to align with India, not out of fear, but out of faith. Smaller countries in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East are looking to New Delhi not as a master, but as a mentor. They see a country that shares their struggles, respects their sovereignty, and doesn't interfere in their systems. That's not just foreign policy, that's global partnership at its most human level, and you better believe that the world is watching. Because when India sends out medical aid during a global pandemic before anyone else, that's leadership. When India creates a digital public infrastructure for 4 billion people and then offers it to the world, that's leadership. When India diffuses regional tensions without air raids, but with diplomacy and timing, that's leadership. And when India trains its youth to code, its farmers to access AI tools, and its defense forces to use the most modern tech in the world, that's the kind of leadership that lasts. What makes India's approach even more remarkable is that it is decentralized. The strength is not locked up in one office or one person. It is spread across institutions, layered in culture, and embedded in civilizational confidence. That's why it's sustainable. That's why it cannot be broken by an election, an embargo, or a crisis. India is also refusing to play the zero-sum game that the traditional powers have thrived on. While others are choosing sides, India is choosing balance. It talks to Russia. It trades with the U.S. It partners with Japan. It invests in Africa. It builds bridges in the Gulf. This is a leadership model based on strategic autonomy, not dependency. It's the model of a nation that says, we will decide our path, not out of defiance, but out of dignity. And let's not forget the backbone of this doctrine, its people. No superpower rises without the support and strength of its population. And India's population is not just large. It is young, driven, and deeply nationalistic. But this nationalism isn't rooted in hate. It's rooted in pride. Pride in a civilization that has endured. Pride in a democracy that has survived. Pride in a future that's finally being shaped by its own hands. Across universities, startups, laboratories, and training camps, there is a hunger in India that can't be manufactured. It has to be lived, a hunger to rise, to own the narrative, to break past colonial shadows and write a fresh chapter where the author is Indian and the audience is global. That's not nationalism, that's self-realization, and once a country discovers that, there is no turning back. Even culturally, India is not diluting itself to appeal to the West, it's doing the opposite. It's wearing its identity proudly, from traditional attire on global stages to Hindi songs, at international events to yoga, being taught in New York. It's exporting not just goods but values. And in doing so, it's redefining what influence looks like. Influence isn't about how many aircraft carriers you have. It's about how many hearts you've touched and how many minds you've opened. India is no longer waiting to be accepted. It is expecting to be respected. And perhaps the most powerful signal of India's rise is its refusal to seek validation. It is comfortable walking its own path. It doesn't need a nod from Washington or Brussels or Beijing. Because when you know your worth, applause becomes optional. India's doctrine today is not about applause, it's about results. And results are now pouring in. From border standoffs to diplomatic summits, from defense expos to tech launches, India is playing with confidence. Not reckless confidence, quiet confidence. the kind that doesn't need to scream because it's rooted in truth. And here's where the world is truly being shaken, because India is doing all this while being a democracy. In a time when autocracies are rising and freedom is shrinking, India is showing that you can have strength with structure, that you can have security with speech, that you can build missiles and still hold elections. That is perhaps the most radical redefinition of power in our times. This is what a superpower looks like today, not a country that demands loyalty but earns admiration, not a country that invades to expand but collaborates to influence, not a country that copies others but creates for itself. That is the India the world is now seeing, and it's changing the way nations think about power. India's leadership model doesn't rely on fear, it thrives on faith. It doesn't chase the spotlight, it lets the spotlight chase it. It doesn't knock on the doors of elite clubs. It creates a space so compelling that others want in. This transformation has caught the world by surprise. But it shouldn't have. The signs were always there, in the hustle of the Indian youth, in the vision of its scientists, in the restraint of its leaders, in the strength of its people. It was never a question of if only when. India's rise is not accidental, it is intentional. It is the product of a million small decisions, each one made with the belief that this nation is destined not just to survive but to lead. And now, the world must come to terms with a new reality. The old blueprint of power no longer works. There's a new one on the table, and it has India's signature all over it.